Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Nature of Plants, an introduction to how plants work, by Craig N. Huegel, narrated by Tom Parks. Publisher's note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to tables present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Preface. Plants have always been an important part of my life. Many of my earliest memories center on the garden, and it is a passion that has endured. I'm a gardener first and a biologist second. I find plants to be fascinating, both for their beauty and their underlying biology. To me, these two aspects cannot be separated from each other. The beauty of plants is easily lost when they are distilled down to just the nuts and bolts of science, but understanding the basics of plant biology is necessary to fully appreciate what makes them special. My appreciation for plants has been greatly increased by understanding how they work, how they function internally, and how they relate to one another and the world around them. And all of this has made me a better gardener. Gardeners do not need to know everything about the biology of plants to be effective, but understanding some of the basics is especially helpful. We need to know enough to understand what plants need to achieve their optimal growth, to reproduce, and to coexist with their neighbors and their enemies. Before we purchase a new plant to add to our landscape, we need to be able to honestly evaluate whether it is the right specimen to make the transition from potted plant to plant community member. We need to understand how it will relate to the growing conditions of our landscape, and when something doesn't go right after we've planted it, we need to understand why. We don't have to become scientists to be good gardeners, but we should understand the science that's been produced by others. After all, we are dealing with finely tuned organisms that have been evolving intricate bells and whistles for nearly 500 million years. The diversity of plants is astounding. Botanists estimate that there are nearly 288,000 unique species of plants in existence today. Nearly 90% of these are flowering plants. The rest are mostly mosses, ferns, and conifers. Nearly every color, shape, and growth form exists to meet the aesthetic needs of a modern-day gardener. This aspect is the one that calls most of us to work with plants. It's the underlying biological part that has largely been ignored. Aristotle believed that plants had the lowest kind of soul because they seemed incapable of any of the behaviors observed in animals. This attitude has largely persisted in our collective psyche. Plants may be interesting to look at, and they are definitely biologically necessary, but most of us view them as somewhat boring, about as exciting as watching grass grow. Many of us who garden often fall into this trap. We purchase plants, dig holes, water them, and give them a jolt of fertilizer before largely leaving them to live life on their own. If our plants fail to prosper, we water and fertilize them again based on a belief that these simple solutions are all that plants really require. If our plants die, we buy new ones or conclude that our failure was somehow due to the plants themselves, and we then buy a different kind to fill the void in our landscape. When we purchase or adopt an animal for our household, we usually do things much differently. Prior to bringing the animal home, we do some research on what our new addition will need from us and what we should expect from it. We take steps to prepare our home to receive it, and we study its acclimation into our household, prepared to call in a veterinarian, a trainer, or some other expert should anything appear out of order. After all, we may reason, animals are complicated and plants are simple. The truth is that plants are far more complex than we have traditionally perceived them to be. In some ways, they are even more complex than animals. Animals have life relatively easy. For one thing, they can move to more favorable conditions when life treats them harshly. This ability to move gives them lots of options that plants do not have. Once a plant's seed or spore germinates, its only choice is to make do with what it's been given. Plants must do everything animals do while remaining in the same location for the duration of their lives. They have had to develop intricate adaptations and behaviors over the more than 500 million years they have been on land. That's a long track record of success. They seem simple to us because what they do is largely done sight unseen and at a rate of speed that is hardly noticeable. This is not a book to teach you the fundamentals of plant biology, though it might do some of that in a roundabout way. Brian Capon has written a useful botany textbook for the general public, Botany for Gardeners, 1990, and there is no need to duplicate his effort. This book is intended to teach gardeners and others who love plants how to apply plant biology to make their work with plants more successful and to unlock some of the mysteries in a practical way so that more gardens thrive and fewer plants die. Along the way, I hope it also gives you a deeper appreciation for how intricate and interesting plants are. As a botany professor and a lifelong gardener, I want to better merge these two disciplines. Too many gardening books focus on what plants do for us, as if their sole purpose centered on their appearance and utility. My desire is that we look at plants without this anthropomorphic bias and see them for their own intrinsic value. This book is an outgrowth of both my classroom and gardening experiences. As a plant biology professor, I routinely take complicated concepts and translate them for my non-botanist students. I also try to focus on those things that I believe might be relevant to their future relationships with plants. My students are not interested in memorizing the intricacies of the Calvin cycle, for example, but they need to know how it works and why it's important. Very few of us, in fact, will ever be asked to sketch out the complex steps in photosynthesis, even though our lives depend on those chemical equations. Understanding the basics of how plants work is important, and that is the approach I've taken in the chapters that follow for all the aspects of plant biology that I've included. When we understand plants, we understand the foundation of life on Earth. I also wish to leave you with an appreciation for how plants work from the perspective of a fellow plant lover. I came to love plants for their beauty and their practicality. I have slowly evolved to love plants simply for their plantness. Plants intrigue me because they are plants. I've come to look at them with a broader perspective than I once did. They have their own stories to tell. This book is my way of sharing their stories. I hope it will add to your love of plants and enhance your joy in working with them. Gardening is more than a hobby to me, as it is to most of the real gardeners I know. For me, my plants are no different than my animal pets. I feel joy in their successes and sorrow in their failures. Though they may depend on me for their daily survival, I depend on them for mine. I do not know what my life would become without my plants and landscape to putter around in. It is my hope that these chapters will add to your gardening joy and enhance the relationships you have with the plants you live with. As the French Impressionist painter Claude Monet once wrote, "My garden is my most beautiful masterpiece." May all of our landscapes be works of enduring and living art. Introduction: Where Plants Come From. Scientists estimate that plants first adapted to life on land about 500 million years ago, emerging from Ordovician oceans after evolving the capacity to do so from certain types of green algae. Before this, the upland portion of our planet was mostly rock. Soils were beginning to form from the action of erosion and the invasion of fungi and their later partnership with green algae and cyanobacteria, lichens. Fungi can extract minerals from bare rock, and the green algae and lichens can photosynthesize. Cyanobacteria can capture atmospheric nitrogen and convert it to the type of nitrogen needed for life. Together, fungi and lichens initiate soil formation in places where no soil exists. Though the fossil evidence is poor, It seems that fungi and then lichens were preparing soil for at least 50 million years before any type of plant crawled out of the ocean to share this ancient landmass referred to as Pangaea. The earliest land plants were simple and looked similar to colonial green algae, the stringy types that are often present at the edges of ponds and other water bodies. They did not have a vascular system, the circulatory system used by most of their descendants to move water, minerals, and simple sugars throughout their bodies. Without roots, the earliest land plants simply absorbed water directly through their one-cell thick leaves and stems. Sugars produced in photosynthesis would not have to be transported because each cell would be doing its own synthesizing. Non-vascular plants still exist in nearly every aquatic and non-aquatic habitat on Earth. We know them as bryophytes, mosses, liverworts, and hornworts, and they remain vital components of the world's flora. Modern bryophytes have evolved to meet the demands of a changing world, but they remain relatively simple compared to the vascular plants that evolved from them. The ferns, gymnosperms, conifers and their relatives, and flowering plants that are the focus of most gardening efforts. The evolution of vascular plants produced real roots and allowed for the development of complex above-ground structures because now there was a circulatory system that allowed for the transport of everything the plant needed throughout its entire body. This adaptation opened the door to many complex structures and behaviors, but it also allowed for the possibility of many things that could go wrong. Simple is sometimes just fine. Ask anyone who once worked on their own car before the advent of engine computers and electronics. At their core, vascular plants have retained the simplicity of their ancient ancestors. They need sunlight to photosynthesize, and the basic C3 pathway that all non-vascular algal plants use still forms the core photosynthetic pathway of all their descendants. Though many higher plants have improved on this model and added a few bells and whistles to modernize it a bit, very little at the core of the process has changed. Plants need water to complete all the major functions necessary for life. They respire, they require certain elements to maintain a base metabolism, and when conditions are right, they grow, reproduce, and eventually die. The bryophytes of 500 million years ago initiated an upward ladder of plant complexity starting with ferns. Ferns and their relatives, horsetails, whisk ferns, club mosses, spike mosses, and quillworts, were the dominant plants during the Carboniferous period, approximately 300 million years ago. Many of our richest coal deposits were produced by these fern forests, and a huge diversity of species existed, including many as large as modern-day trees. Scientists believe that the Earth was generally warmer and more humid during this time. Ferns and their relatives made one especially significant change from their mossy ancestors. They developed a simple vascular system. By developing true roots, they could pull water, with all its dissolved nutrients, up from the soil or off a rock. The stems could then take the mineral-rich water and transport it into the fronds. Likewise, the chloroplasts inside the green fronds and stems could take the sun's energy, convert it to glucose, and then send those simple sugars throughout the entire plant. Unlike bryophytes, not every part of the plant needed to absorb water and perform photosynthesis. They could have specialized parts in their overall structure. Ferns could now grow to be much larger than their mossy predecessors. All of this made for huge advances in the plant world, and it became the new model for every other type of plant to follow. From this point forward, all plants would have specialized roots, stems, and leaves. Ferns and their relatives, however, still rely on relatively archaic methods for reproduction. Like the bryophytes that came before them, they produce spores instead of seeds, and they produce them in structures that rely solely on the wind to move them to new locations. To be fair, this was the most effective means of dispersal at the time of their evolution. There simply were no pollinators present in the Carboniferous period. There were plenty of insects, but there was nothing for them to pollinate. Wind has its limitations, especially in warm and humid air. Plants, like most of us, wish our children well as they move out into the world and become their own masters. We just don't wish for them to live at home their entire lives. Nearby is fine, but on their own and independent of us. Windy days effectively move spores long distances, but plants have no control over the wind, and relying on chance is never the most efficient strategy for success. Ferns and other fern-like plants maintained another characteristic of the bryophytes that also limited their reproduction. They required a film of water to get their gametes together for fertilization. Like the bryophytes, fern sperm is flagellated and can only reach a fern egg by swimming to it. They are completely dependent on the weather around them to produce new ferns. Reproduction cannot occur during periods of drought unless a layer of dew is produced overnight. More often than not, fern reproduction requires extended periods of moisture produced by rain and high humidity. This worked fine during the Carboniferous period, but became more limiting as the Earth's climate became less tropical. Today, most of these plants are found in tropical and semi-tropical areas or in the vicinity of wetlands or seasonally wet habitats. The incredible diversity of ferns and related plants found in the Carboniferous period has significantly declined. Spores aren't all bad. They've worked successfully for hundreds of millions of years. Because they are so small, they can be produced in huge numbers with little investment on the part of the parents. Their minute size enables them to remain lightweight and capable of long-distance movements. They also can be quite resistant to temperature extremes and desiccation. The downside to spores is that they contain very little nutrition for the tiny embryonic plant inside. When a spore decides to sprout, the baby plant must find water and nutrients almost immediately if it is to survive its first days. There's little room for error. For that reason, the overwhelming number of spores produced by ferns and mosses perish before the young adult is even noticeable. The evolution of seeds began in the Carboniferous period with the emergence of the so-called seed ferns, but it didn't really reach the advancement seen in more modern plants until the Permian period, approximately 50 million years later. By this time, plants easily recognizable as gymnosperms, conifers, cycads, ginkgos, and neophytes, comprised the dominant plant life. This continued well through the age of the dinosaurs, ending approximately 100 million years later. Dinosaurs existed in a world largely devoid of flowering plants. The great herbivores so frequently shown in modern film and television feasted on pine trees, cycads, and the like, and did not encounter flowering plants until sometime late in the Cretaceous period, approximately 90 million years ago. Gymnosperms perfected several significant new features that would become models for all the plants that would follow. Foremost was a reproductive system far less dependent on moisture and better designed to protect the developing embryo. Gymnosperms produced seeds in protective cones. They produced pollen instead of flagellated sperm to fertilize their eggs. And their fertilized seeds contained large stores of nutrients for the developing embryo inside. They could still cast huge quantities of pollen into the air because, like spores, there was little parental investment in producing it. However, they could focus more attention on the seeds, producing just a few in comparison to ferns and mosses, but ensuring that a much higher percentage would actually develop and grow. Seeds were a huge advancement in the evolution of modern plants. For one, the fertilized embryos are encased inside them. Instead of being encapsulated inside a thin casing as spores are, Seeds have both a seed coat and a rich food source to protect and nourish the developing embryonic plant inside. Spores are cast out into the world by their parents with few resources on which to draw. Seeds pamper the infant, protect and nourish it, and give it time to fully develop before it leaves the seed, sprouts, and becomes a functioning juvenile on its own. When the juvenile plant emerges from its seed, it is far more ready to face the world than any plant produced by a spore. It already has the beginning of its roots and stems. It has embryonic leaves, and it often maintains a portion of its original nutrition stores to draw on while its roots fully develop their ability to draw water from the ground. Furthermore, its leaves have the ability to produce new food via photosynthesis. Baby plants produced by seeds start life with an advantage. Producing seeds takes far more investment on the part of the parents, but it ensures a higher rate of survival for their offspring. The production of seeds also creates more opportunity to fine-tune the process of germination. Breaking the dormancy of a spore is a relatively simple process. Mostly it involves having the right moisture conditions around it. Spores can remain dormant for long periods of time, waiting for just the right moisture conditions to occur. The embryo inside is in a state of suspended animation until then. Seeds, on the other hand, often have more elaborate mechanisms to prevent them from sprouting until everything seems just right. Seeds require some kind of stratification to break their dormancy. Cold, heat, light, water, abrasion, or combinations of these conditions. By having a seed coat that requires certain conditions to be met before germination will occur, the embryo inside is protected from sprouting under conditions that are less than optimal for them to start life on their own. Seeds also diversify dispersal methods. Whereas the simple, rounded spores of mosses and ferns require an air current to move them away from their parents, wind-dispersed seeds are often aided by the presence of wings to help carry them farther. This was a major advancement, but most seed-producing plants completely abandoned their reliance on wind. They developed other options, and the most significant new vector was movement by animals. When swallowed whole, seeds pass through the digestive tract of animals and are released in their waste as they move about. Animals that make long-distance movements can carry seeds to completely new habitats not already colonized, and the seeds are deposited with their own dollop of fertilizer. The gymnosperms initiated this mode of dispersal, but it was the flowering plants that developed later that perfected it. Gymnosperms were also the first plants to truly protect their offspring during early development. They did this by producing their eggs inside rigid cones and then surrounding them inside these cones until the embryos were fully developed. While seed ferns merely held their primitive seeds inside open, cup-like structures, gymnosperms encased them in woody, often spiny scales. In modern-day pines, for example, it can take more than a year for fertilization to occur once the pollen is captured inside the egg-producing cone. Then, it may take another 12 to 16 months for the seeds to develop and mature. For all this time, everything is well protected inside the cone. The spores of ferns and mosses are in no way so well guarded. Last, gymnosperms do not require water for fertilization to take place. Their sperm are encased inside the pollen grains, and the pollen is dispersed in the wind. Like spores, pollen is lightweight and capable of long-distance movement under the right environmental conditions. The pollen of gymnosperms comes surrounded by two wings for extra buoyancy in their aerial travels. But the sperm inside does not require a film of water on which to travel to the egg. Some primitive gymnosperms still have flagellated sperm that evidence their evolutionary connection to the ferns and mosses, but they don't use them in fertilization. Their pollen actually creates a tube that burrows toward the unfertilized egg and deposits the sperm next to it. The evolution of gymnosperms created an intricate new level of complexity not seen in plants previously. Reproduction was fine-tuned to increase the likelihood of success. Sperm now had to have a burrow created for it to reach the unfertilized egg. Females now had more control over which sperm would do the fertilization, and the entire process was less haphazard. Some gymnosperms, the conifers and ginkgos, also evolved the ability to produce wood and thereby increase their girth. True wood did not exist in the tree ferns or any of the other fern-like plants that compose the forests of the Carboniferous period. Wood and increased girth allowed for upward growth not previously possible. Pines, Pinus species, cedars, Juniperus species, spruces, Pisceus species, cypress, Taxodium species, and the like can reach mature heights of more than 100 feet, something previously impossible. Mature redwoods, Sequoia sempervirens, and sequoias, Sequoia dendrum giganteum, routinely exceed 350 feet. Wood permits a great many functions. It provides structure, allows other plants to attach and grow, and adds structural complexity to plant communities. Gymnosperms dominated the Earth's upland habitats for at least 150 million years, sharing the area with dinosaurs until late in the Cretaceous period, approximately 100 million years ago. Relatively recent information gleaned from the fossil record demonstrates that flowering plants emerged in the prehistoric flora well before an asteroid struck the Yucatan Peninsula and changed everything with a global mass extinction event. The large-scale habitat changes that followed this asteroid strike allowed the remaining plants to quickly evolve, and what evolved were flowering plants. More than 350,000 species of flowering plants have emerged in the last 100 million years, more than all other plant types combined. Our modern world is completely dominated by plants that produce flowers. Flowers provided plants with an ability no other plant possessed, a means of pollination not reliant on wind power, but rather facilitated by the movement of pollinating animals. Wind had worked rather efficiently up to this time, but using animals to transfer seeds and pollen opened a new door that has proven extremely effective. With the evolution of flowers came an explosion in the evolution of pollinators, especially among pollinating insects. Modern-day bees and pollinating wasps evolved from predatory species. Prior to flowers, there was no need to collect, feed on, and disseminate pollen. Evolutionary ecologists believe that butterflies evolved from ancient caddisflies, the group that includes bagworms, at the same time flowering plants began to proliferate. There is no doubt that the evolution of flowers coincided with the evolution of pollinators, and that this relationship continues and defines many of our modern gardening practices. Pollinators allowed for selective pollination. Plants could develop complex relationships with their pollinators, and pollinators could become extremely specialized. The element of chance that was the driving force behind wind pollination was largely circumvented. Of course, all of this meant that plants became ever more complex, and complexity brings both benefits and difficulties. Suffice it to say that since nearly 85% of the world's plants produce flowers, and nearly 85% of those are animal-pollinated, this is a very effective strategy. Pollinated flowers produce fruit, and that too was a major advance over the cones produced by gymnosperms. While gymnosperms produce seeds protected beneath the covering of a hardened scale, the seeds themselves are mostly reliant on wind for dispersal. There are some exceptions, but pines, spruces, and others in the conifer family produce seeds covered by a light diaphanous wing. When the seeds are ripe, the scales of the cone open, releasing the winged seeds to float away in the wind. Flowering plants, such as the grasses and orchids, still rely on wind power.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?